that connect? It looks like you have a Connect 4 behind you, like a big Connect 4 board.
I do. That's
Oh, really? Okay.
Tara bought that for around the pool this summer.
Oh, nice.
The kids they never used it, but it is a giant Connect 4.
For a second, I thought it was a dog gate. So okay. All right. Welcome to the first live broadcast video thing of Tigers SRD here on Motor City Bengals and, of course, at sportsradiodetroit.com. I'm Rogelio Castillo. Alongside me is Chris Brown, literally right here to my left or right. I'm not sure how this whole view is going right now. How's it
right now? You're to my left.
Okay, so you're to my right now. So it's relatively. We're trying something out for the first time. We've been meaning to do this for a long time, but I upgraded my gear, so I got a Shure mic, one of these really good broadcasting mics, and we just wanted to make sure that the time and StreamYard and technology and all that stuff. So, but I think we worked out the kinks and what have you. So this will be recorded for podcast purposes for tomorrow, but I just wanted to have a live element to it. So,
yeah, and if you've always wondered about the squeaks in the background,
yeah, where's Charlie?
Now you can see.
Oh, there's Charlie.
He only plays around 9 o'clock at night for some reason. So
she sees you on the mic. She's like, "All right, I got to start talking."
Yeah. I'll try to just sit here for now. But
yeah, so if you hear the squeaking, you wonder why that's coming from. Well, bam, there you go. That's what's going on with that right now. So, but yeah, we're live right now, and you can check us out on Twitter and at YouTube channel. So if you're hang on YouTube, go to the Tiger Minor League Report channel, and it's right there. So we appreciate you coming and checking us out. So coming up tonight on the show, we're going to be talking about the non-tender date that's gone and what the Tigers did, which was a lot of nothing, but it's okay. We'll get to that in a little while. Why I think it's perfectly fine. We got some questions on social media. So Chris got like 9 or 10 questions. One question that we will not discuss at all.
Unless you want to.
No.
Yeah, I think I saw like 3 or 4. Maybe you saw some more, but we got some questions. I don't know if we want to tackle those at the top of the show later, whenever we want to do it. But
okay, and I will look at. I'm going to look at the Twitter feed right now. I think we're going to have some questions on Twitter too. You can stream us live, and if you want to chat with us too, there is a chat section thing right here. So I'll post that here in a second on our Twitter. And you can go from there. So if you are checking us out there, just leave us a question, and Chris will be looking through our Periscope thing, which is, I think, for Twitter. So there you go. But at any rate, so we continue on, and we'll also be talking about the 1991 Tigers squad. But yeah, there's some trades today that happened too, Chris. I wanted to get your opinion on as the Rockies continue to make some moves. It's the second trade they've made this offseason so far. Does that sound right?
Yeah, they made the one with the Reds for their former first rounder Jeff Hoffman for the Reds, a couple highly touted pitching prospects from like 6 years ago, Robert Stevenson.
Yeah,
I don't know. I may have seen the one today, but I didn't think it was very big, was it? It was just kind of a couple dudes.
Yeah, it was just a couple players. And the minor league, there's a lot of first round draft picks were on non-tender too. So I will want to talk about that. We'll get to that. The Spotify Unwrapped. Did you get one, Chris? We'll talk about that too a little bit. Matt Patricia's gone. We talked about him last week on the Thanksgiving special, so it was really weird that now he's gone. Him and Bob Quinn are gone. And the Hall of Fame vote for the Internet Writers Baseball Association, I was on a chat with them they had a nice conference call on Tuesday, and we were talking baseball. But yeah, the 1991 Tigers, we're going to discuss that team. A lot of fans of that squad. There's a lot of power in that squad too as well. So, but yeah, let's look at the non-tender deadline. There's a lot of players, Chris, that went unclaimed, and the Tigers had their opportunities. But in some ways, if I think about it, I'm not surprised, because this is a team, the Tigers tend to wait till January, even sometimes February, to make moves. And throughout their history, the Maglio Ordonez signing was, I believe, on February 3rd. Pudge was late in January. Mm-hmm. So last year, they signed both players on the same day. Even with what's strange to me was when they did the call up was all in one day. So it's kind of weird how they've been doing it recently, which is fine. And I mean, I did want them to go after Eddie Rosario from the Twins, the left bat power hitter with some numbers. I mean, the Twins have been reported to trade him last year. No one drawn interest, but I'm not surprised, but then again, Chris, I know some of the names you suggest on your piece today, I like a lot. Dahl's out there for the Rockies. We mentioned them earlier, but I don't. What was your whole thoughts of the whole deadline?
Yeah, it's always kind of interesting to see how the industry's perception of the value of these players compares to, like, our fans or anybody who's just cruising Fangraphs and stuff, looks at a guy's WAR and thinks, well, hey, they should go after him. But yeah, I mean, I guess David Dahl was the most surprising to me, just because he's still young and he's not that expensive, and he was such a high prospect for the Rockies. But and Schwarber was a mild surprise, but we kind of knew that the Cubs they're tightening the belt now. I don't know. I guess it's just been strange because we've seen a couple teams spend some money early in the free agency period, and so it looked like, hey, maybe not everything was going to be too bad from the post-COVID revenue streams or whatever. But there are a lot of guys who just lost their jobs because they were making too much money, which is unfortunate. It's an unfortunate aspect of the way that contracts are structured in baseball.
Yeah, and you see the Phillies are losing money. There's the reports about that, and so I don't know, Chris. I still think that the aftermath of what teams potentially lost is still not out there. That probably has a large part of it.
Yeah, I mean, at least that's what they're going to be saying. Teams are going to say. I hate to be so dismissive or negative of them losing money. Obviously, they took a hit in their profit, their revenues this year. But it's one of those things where people always point out, well, so that, yeah, did they give out extra money when they had a massive year? Not really. I mean, we saw that the prices were going down a couple of years ago anyway. Remember, I think the one, it was 2 years ago or last year, where the qualifying offer finally went down for the first time ever. So they're the teams are doing price controls any way they can, and it does feel like a lot of what has happened is less a reaction to COVID-19 and more hey, we can do this because of COVID-19. It's like they don't have to, but they are because they can. Just adding the DH in both leagues and all this men on second and extra innings, all the stuff they wanted to try. They just figured they could do it this year because there's nothing to lose.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, where they can, in a way, unleash the hound, if you will, for lack of a better word. But there is it. What I've been finding interesting too is in terms of some of the offers we've seen with pitchers too, with the 1-year deals so far with Drew Smiley, saw Charlie Morton like at $15 million. But the positional players have been kind of relatively quiet. I mean, we saw today the Mets are interested in going after James McCann, and then the Yankees are interested also in a guy who I would want the Tigers sign, Michael Brantley. So there's been rumors. There's been the James McCann stuff is, hi, I'm Raheli. I got James McCann wrong. I freely admit that. That's fine. I mean, you and I have talked on the best of. We talked about this was like 4 years ago. Who knew? But
yeah, he wasn't very good for the Tigers. He went to the White Sox and got better. You could give him credit. I don't know who was writing I think it was a MLB pipeline article, not pipeline, but the MLB article about how he actually got better with his framing. He wanted to, and he went and did it. And give the guy credit. He was always, physically gifted, and people loved him for his arm. And he's turned himself into a better hitter and a better defender, and he's going to get paid. And that's awesome. It's a bummer that didn't happen in Detroit, but sometimes these things don't work out.
Yeah, he has a really good work ethic, and you have to credit the White Sox for recognizing that. And he went down there and did his thing. And I don't understand when sometimes people go on and I still don't like the guy. No, McCann worked his ass off and earned the money.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I didn't like about him was it seemed like he had a Southern accent, even though he's from California. But we know from David Cross that anybody can have that accent.
Yeah, David Cross was dead on about that, and he was. This is the first year he wasn't on my Spotify Unwrapped list. He was on my list for a while, like in terms of comedy specials and stuff like that. But no, and the thing is too about the Met. I mean, Steve Cohen has done a really good job of rallying the Mets fans, and to me, that's refreshing. It's awesome because, and this is a time of year where there's not a lot of news. You got the winter meetings that are coming up, and it's virtual. So credit where credit's due for on that aspect, that he was able to go, hey, you know what, guys, I'm a fan just like you, and all these Mets fans are really excited. And I'm not from New York, we're from the Midwest, but it's you see every day the Yankees and Mets are dominating the headline, and per normal, it's always kind of the way the offseason works. But in terms of other players that were non-tendered, I know there was the big surprise. Was there any big surprises that you were kind of like we talked about Dahl? Was there anybody else that stood out to you?
Well, I mean, I was a little surprised by Rosario, a little surprised by Schwarber. Adam Duvall was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, you look at it and go, okay, I guess I understand. He's 32 or whatever. It doesn't do a whole lot other than home runs, but it seemed like Braves fans loved him. Let's see, Archie Bradley, a mild surprise there. I'm trying to think, who was there was another a quality reliever for the Twins. They let go. Matt Whistler, is that it?
Yeah, I believe it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm probably missing a player. Well, I mean, it's not a shock, but Carlos Rodon and Nomar Mazara were let go from the White Sox. Those are big names. Mazara has never really lived up to his billing, and Rodon could never get things going properly. You know, there would be times when he looked good but couldn't throw strikes, and times where he was throwing strikes but was getting hit, and then he keeps getting hurt. And the bummer, but yeah, I mean, a couple shocking names, but nothing super like, whoa, I never saw that coming. I mean, the closest was Dahl, I guess, and even then I could see, he's been injured a ton.
Yeah, there's a first baseman right now that's in the winter leagues in Rango Rivero, who is playing. I think he's playing in. I can't remember what team he's playing for in the Dominican Republic, but that was a name that for anybody who is a Cardinals fan, he could play all over. He's a first baseman, right fielder out of Cuba. He was just a kind of a part-time player for the Cardinals. So that's a name out there for first. I don't know. These are some of the names I'm thinking of is perhaps like at some point low end targets to Tigers. There's a list of names of Kurt Caselli, the catcher, Tony Walters, another light hitting catcher. There is Danny Santana, who we talked about last week on the podcast. Daniel Robertson, who we talked about this week. Franco from the Royals kind of caught me off guard.
Franco.
Yeah.
He's another guy he's one I could see fitting the Tigers because of his, we joke about the Rosario thing about how, he seems to fit the Tigers mold because he swings a ton. The Tigers like guys who attack the ball and don't walk a lot and don't strike out a ton. They don't mind the guys who strike out a ton, but Franco doesn't strike out a ton. He's another guy who's never quite. He was like a top 50 prospect for the Phillies, and never got really very good. He was kind of fringe average, and I think he had a solid year for the Royals. I don't know if it was this year or last year or when he got there, but yeah, he's an option for them. I don't know if the Tigers are going to pursue anybody at third base or first base. I would think one of those positions they will, and depending on which one determines where Candelario plays next year. Because I think they're going to have Isaac Paredes back in Toledo if possible.
Well, I mean, the thing is,
or second base, but I don't think they'll play on second base.
Yeah, right now in the Mexican League, in the winter leagues, right now he's been playing third. He hasn't played second, which it's always every time I write an article about a second baseman free agent, they're like, "Well, what about Paredes?" Well, they haven't played him at second base yet. And he's not played there in the minors at all. He's either played short or third. Ideally, you want him at second, but the Tigers have their own plan, and that's fine, whatever they want to do. And he's shown a really good arm, and he's done really well in the Winter League so far. And so, if you're looking at possibilities at third base too, or first base rather, I mean, there's not even been that talk about having CJ Cron back either. It's been very quiet.
It wouldn't shock me if they bring Cron back at all. Yeah, I mean that's one of the other things is we tend to react immediately to the non-tender deadline or whatever, anything like this, where like, oh, they didn't do anything. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? They're some of these players could be negotiating with like 6 or 7 different teams. The Tigers might be in on a couple of them. You really only saw a few moves, a couple trades prior to the non-tender deadline. That the Dodgers made the trade for Corey Knebel. And I'm trying to think of any other deals that were made. I don't think any other sort of substantial deals were made. I think one of the things that teams seem to be really, you mentioned that the pitchers are getting signed, but not position players so much. It really seems like teams are waiting to find out if there's going to be a universal DH. I think that might just be an excuse, though, because I'm pretty sure that they know there won't be next year because it's going to be a negotiation tool for the owners. But maybe that's why teams are a little bit slow to target, like, the Marcelo Zuna or somebody like that who is an outfielder / DH or Schwarber, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I imagine we'll see some more moves in the next couple days, and then things might pick up a little bit around I don't know if they're doing virtual winter meetings or whatever is going on.
It's a bunch of Zoom calls. It's just like, and like just everything's freezing up. But yeah, for the Tigers right now, I mean, if you look at some of the pitchers that were not non-tendered, another one too, Jose Arena, who's just a few years ago removed from a pretty started a good career with the Marlins, and I don't know, he's an intriguing arm, but his numbers are suggest otherwise. But again, I mean, we're not also it's something that Brandon Day mentioned in our chat, like we had a little chat about, is Chris Fetter going to fix everything? He could fix everything. We joke around about it. He's not a miracle worker, but I think that, and your article, you're talking about pitching design, anything, you can always just kick around the tires for a pitcher, especially if you look at the Tigers starting rotation next year, they still have 2 pitchers to sign. They still have to sign 2 pitchers too. And so the way the market's been going right now, it's been very aggressive towards starting arms.
Yeah. And in some cases, a lot more aggressive than I expected. Like, Robbie Ray and Drew Smiley got much more money than I thought they would. Charlie Morton maybe got less. I don't know, $15 million for 1 year is not bad at all, but I thought maybe he'd push for more. Maybe he was just going to go through with I don't know. I also wonder if teams and players are just pushing for 1 year deals because they have no idea what's going to happen with the CBA next year. So I don't know. Yeah, the starting pitchers and relievers, there weren't a ton of guys who really caught my eye. I mentioned Matt Whistler. Jonathan Holder was sort of interesting for the Yankees once upon a time. I mentioned Nick Tropiano in a piece at Motor City Bengals, just because I wanted one pitcher in there, and I was like, all right, well, this is a story that's sort of interesting. He's a guy who never has done much, and then he went to the Pirates and just completely changed his pitch mix. He basically stopped throwing his fastball. He didn't stop, but he threw it 15% less and just started throwing a ton of splitters and sliders, and that seemed to work for him. And my theory was that teams are going to need a lot of innings next year, so we might see them sign a few more of these kind of swingmen, long reliever, spot starter types this year. And I feel like he's a guy who could be interesting for the Tigers. But yeah, I mean, who are the other starters? You wrote up about Trevor Williams getting DFA'd.
I like his mix a lot because you look at what Pittsburgh's been doing. I mean, Pittsburgh has kind of changed their pitching philosophy, and I've been writing up some reports for Prospects Live, so their philosophy's changed a little bit. And Trevor kind of represents the old guard. He went from his changeup, and he started throwing more of it, he started throwing less of his fastball, started with his slider, and also he pitches more. He has a pretty good swing rate against his changeup, so I think there's something there for that, but I think he might go to a bigger market. Who knows? But I like him a lot. I think he would be. Go ahead. What were you going to say? I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I think probably his biggest bonus is that he's pretty durable. I think we talked. He hasn't really had. I think maybe he was on the IL once, and it was just like a 10-day thing or whatever. And that's going to be really valuable this year. Because I'm still not convinced. Or I'm not convinced that there's going to be a full 162 game season. I'm sure that everybody involved wants to do that, but just logistics of moving from pitchers who threw like at the most 75 innings this year, having them try to get up to 200. Basically everybody having to add 100 innings to their arms. It's even with all the training and stuff they do, that's going to end up in a lot of injuries, I think. And so I don't know if they're going to try to split the difference and do like a 120 game season, 100 game season, something like that. But no matter what, teams are going to need a lot more innings this year. So anybody who's proven that they can give you innings without completely imploding, I think is going to be valuable.
Yeah, I mean, even you're going to see a guy possibly like a Foster Griffin who might get an opportunity because of how. I'm saying this in a sense of they might kind of kick out the tires and see what's going on
the
with
Royals. Wasn't he the dude who got hurt in his major league start or his debut?
Yes, I believe it was. So, we got some comments, by the way. We got some. Yeah, we do got some comments here. I didn't even see that.
Look at that duck. What?
Oh, Dan Hasty said he's a big fan of Archie Griffin, by the way, for the win. And,
Archie Bradley?
Yeah.
Did I say Archie Griffin?
I said Archie Griffin. I did.
I didn't realize that there were comments over here. I'm sorry, everybody.
Yeah, but check it out, Chris. Look, I can show the comments on here. So
wait a minute. Matthew listens to this at 3 times speed. I do 2 times speed, 3 times speed. We want to sound like chipmunks, man.
Yeah.
No.
Here's a doll right here from comment from Joe. By the way, this is all new, so keep leaving the comments. And this is sweet. So so Joe here says doll had a rough year, but most projects to bounce back recently. Sweet. Ed Miller, big fan of the show. Thanks, Ed. We appreciate it. And we also, here's the comment from Dan. Big fan. P.S.
Yeah. So, I mean, Archie Bradley was a guy who, remember, he was a part of that amazing 2011 draft class, I think. And he was a starter for a while with the Diamondbacks and then became a really damn good reliever. The last couple of years weren't as good as his first year as a reliever, I think. But he ended up on the Reds last year, I believe. It was such a strange year. But yeah, I didn't put any. I guess Tropiano I put in there because I thought he could be a long reliever. I didn't put any sort of high leverage relievers because it just doesn't seem like a market that the Tigers need to get into right now. If that makes sense. Like you don't need closers and setup man. Everybody needs them, but I don't know. Seems like the Tigers have a lot more work to do than before concerning themselves with the 8th and 9th innings. But I do like Archie Bradley, so if they want to do that, then go for it.
You know what? There's another arm too. I like it's Anthony Bass, the former Wayne State. I wrote about him way earlier.
And Shoemaker's available.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna go local talent and appeal to that regard, then absolutely. But again, I think that if they're going to make, I think it might be the case where last year where they make all the moves at once and then they're done. And I think it might be the case. I could be wrong. I don't know. I mean, it's just all speculation.
My hat says this is my hair now. I can do that. But I was a journalism major.
Oh yeah. Well, I have 7 West Michigan Whitecap hats. This is one of 7. So I mean,
Harrison was wearing his Traverse City Pit Spitters shirt yesterday, but
there you go.
I don't have my Bunghammer shirt on me right now. I got to do laundry.
I got the Havana Cubans shirt on, which is a great product, by the way, from Ebbets Field. We're not sponsored, but I'm a big fan of that website. So if you're looking for a Christmas gift for that baseball fan, let us know. Or just check out the website. Anyway, again, not sponsored, but just a fan of the site. I digress. But yeah, there's even if you're going to address a rotation, I think that's where they're going to start. But it might seem to be where they all do it at one. There's one arm that I did like that was out, and the Mets released him, which I found is the left-hander Chase Shreve.
Jason Shreve.
Shreve, yes.
Yeah.
Had some good numbers last year. Not, no, his numbers seem fine. And I know right now with Soto back there, the Tigers are set on left-handed relievers, which is something that we don't say very often recently. So I think they're fine there. But I just thought it was an arm. And then was it John Verberg on Twitter mentioned a name that was released from the Royals. It was a former Astro prospect, and I'm drawing a blank on who that guy is at the moment. But I looked over it all yesterday, but it didn't stick out to me. Yeah, I'll have to see. I can't remember the pitcher's name. I looked him up, and he was with the Astros around the time that whole regime was going on. So.
Well, that could make some sense if he's got some history with AJ Hinch.
Yeah, and I thought I was literally writing the Corey Newell piece, and then the Dodgers traded for him, and that was a brilliant move by the Dodgers. I mean, you look at the fact that Jansen struggled a little bit in the postseason. He's got some miles in the arm. You get Newell fresh off Tommy John surgery. He only had a couple, less than a year on that arm. So, but yeah, I mean, to me, that makes a lot of sense. And the Dodgers will probably look at him and go, you know what, move to the left right here, then right here, and you'll be good to go. Done.
Well, that's one of the interesting things, Mark Gorash tweeted today. I don't know if anybody responded to it. He found it interesting that the Dodgers went after Knebel instead of Archie Bradley. And I was thinking about it, and I think, even though I just wrote that article how the Dodgers were, taking advantage of sinkers, I mean, that was more of an inference on my part. I don't know that for sure. Maybe they just threw a bunch of sinkers and were really good because Brusdar Gratterall and Dustin May could throw them at 100 miles an hour. But in Archie Bradley's more of a low spin sinker guy. But I thought maybe just Knebel fits more of the classic high high in the zone, four-seam fastball, high spin curveball. His breaking ball was really good. And at his best, I think he was better than Archie Bradley at his best. And in some regards, he kind of reminds me of the Dodgers. I don't remember what round they got him in, but the pitcher Clayton Beeter, I think it was, that they took in this year's draft, who had like kind of an over-the-top delivery and a big fastball and a big curveball. And I think the Dodgers feel like they can make something happen there for sure. He was a smart man.
They got Beeter in the second round.
Second round?
Yeah, they got him in the second round of the draft. I thought you would talk about that one. Who was it? The one that made their debut, who came up from like 20, the one out of Oakland University, or was it a local kid that they got from here? Or who was that guy that was like from the 23rd round that just came up out of nowhere?
Oh, Zach McKinstry, the kid from CMU.
Yeah, CMU. Yeah. It's insane.
No, that was all from that 2016 draft, which is
probably
ridiculous.
one of the best drafts. Yeah, one of the best drafts they put together. So that was some smart moves smart move by the Dodgers rather to get a reliever like that, especially in a market where relievers in terms of free agent market doesn't look like promising. So, but as far as in terms of other non-tender arms in there, there's Tyler Anderson who's the lefty, but Giants didn't offer him back, and the Giants could use some pitching and they didn't offer anything back. So that's just something about that. And other than that, yeah, I mean, I mentioned the reliever earlier. Oh, Jose Martinez, which seems to me, Chris, he seemed like he fell off a cliff. And I'm not saying literally, but just in terms of numbers.
No, he literally fell off a cliff, and that makes him made him hard to play baseball because he was in the air at the time. No, yeah, he was a solid player, kind of role player for the Cardinals for a while, right? And strangely tall utility guy. And then he went to he with the Rays last year and just didn't do much?
Oh, he was with the Cubs. He was with
Cubs, okay.
Cubs, yep.
Yeah, let me let this dog out real quick. So
go ahead.
Everybody watching can look at my attempt at a memorabilia wall.
Yeah, so the art major is gonna let the dog out here real quick. So but no, in terms of other players, if there's any comments, guys, by the way, if you're watching online, thank you. Any comments, any questions for us, just go ahead and leave them if you're watching us on Twitter, if you're watching us on the YouTube channel, feel free to leave us a comment. And we're going to be talking about the 91 Tigers here in a few minutes. But
sorry about that.
That's all right. So Charlie's out. There's no squeaking. She did not squeak for the first time in a while.
He was whining and at the window, I didn't want him to pee. So we'll see what happens. I'll probably have to go get him in a second. It's cold out there. He gets chilly.
So in terms of even another player, I don't. There's another the one mentioned. There was one more player I forgot to mention, and that was Brian Goodwin. I think that's another one too. That's a little bit intriguing.
Yeah, for sure. He was a guy that was around forever with the Nats, I think, and it seemed like he never was going to pop. And then he had a really the Angels just picked him up for nothing, and a really nice season with him. And then this last year was with the Reds, I guess. But he's he's always been like an intriguing athlete, power and speed, can play center field. You just don't know if 2019 was kind of just one of those lucky years, and because he didn't do a whole lot this year. But he's definitely a guy that I'd be intrigued in. I mean, Tigers need outfielders, and he's somebody I'd look at for sure.
What about I don't know? Did you talk about? I mean, in terms of Albert Amora's special. I mean, what would be something about him? I mean, he's represented by Scott Boras, so you know full well he's going to get an extra push a little bit.
Well, he just changed his agent.
Oh,
he was with Boras. He was with Boras, and then he switched to I don't know, like some other. The thing with Almora was his calling card was defense. He was even coming out of the draft. He was the 6th overall pick in 2012, I think, and he was all about defense with him. But it turned out that he wasn't one of those guys who was like super fast or anything like that. He just had some pretty good instincts. And none of his tools ever really developed. He doesn't hit for power. He doesn't steal bases. He doesn't hit for a great average. He just was kind of a solid defensive center fielder. And it's, I mean, can you imagine if the Tigers had just cut 2 first-rounders to save money? I mean, sometimes they hold on to their first-rounders too long. But hey, Jay Polger.
Yeah.
Polger? Yeah. That's a solid comments. I mean, at some point the Tigers might want to be working these platoons. We talked a couple years ago about that. The Rays seem to have a platoon at every position.
So Miller wants to know if you can pick 2 non-tenders. Who do you got? I'll let you go first, Chris.
We got another question sort of like that. For me, it's I would take Dahl and Casale. Just I know Casale's nothing special, but every time he plays in the last couple of years, he performs. He walks and he hits for power, and he's a decent enough catcher. And it would just, I mean, he's not Andrew Romine, at least considered as good a defender as Andrew Romine, but I think that was a little bit overblown, and he's a better offensive player. And he's never really had a chance to play a lot. I feel like it'd be nice to see him get out there. And Dahl, I mean, to me, Dahl is just like, it might not work out, but if it does, he's the sort of guy who could actually keep around and build around. I think I mentioned, somebody asked earlier in the question, but he's 4 months younger than Kristen Stewart. So, I mean, I don't think they're still planning on building on Kristen Stewart, but they're going to give him another shot. But I would rather give David Dahl a shot.
Yeah. Honestly, because I have to go a little different here. I mean, I would that's an easy choice, but I go Eddie Rosario because of his left-handed power, his numbers, in terms of even, I know he's a high swinging guy. The batting average against lefties and righties are the same, so you don't have to platoon him, unlike Jock Peterson, which I know Tiger fans love Jock Peterson, and that's fine. But I like Eddie Rosario's upside a little better. And I mean, he fits the Tigers motif. Doesn't walk, strikes out decently. I mean, he's not, but he makes hard contact, and you can put him left field, not worry. And he comes off 2 years removed from a 32 home run season. And combined in 2019, he had more home runs than all the Tigers left field combined. Same thing last year.
Yeah, and he doesn't grade out as a very good defender. I mean, he sort of vacillates between average and below average. But he has a really good arm, and I think he absolutely hosed a Tiger this year. I don't remember who it was.
Nathan Kahn with my no thank you.
I mean, you know what? I take him because he's a major leaguer, but I get what he's saying. You know, we'd like more well-rounded players, I guess. But Peterson, he'd be something to look at.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, again, no knock on Christian Stewart because we might get yelled at for that, but that's another.
Christian Stewart is a nice dude.
Yeah,
I interviewed him right after he got up to West Michigan. I was able to interview him, and he's a really nice dude, and he mashed in the minor leagues, did exactly what you'd hope he'd do, and it just hasn't worked at the major league level. And I compared him. I said basically Kyle Schwarber is what the Tigers hoped Stewart would be. He walks, he hits home runs, he doesn't play very good defense, and he doesn't hit for much of an average. Stewart's defense is actually worse than Schwarber's, and he just hasn't hit for power. If he hit for power, there'd be something there. But I don't want to completely give up on him, but it's getting late early for Stewart.
And then the other pitcher, or the other player, I would probably non-tender. And I debated about this for a little while. I know that Kellen on the staff over at Motor City Bengals is excited about Archie Bradley, and rightfully so. And his numbers kind of intrigue me a little bit, but if you're going to go maybe buy low, and a guy maybe like just be a little different, is AJ Cole from Toronto. Just because I think I honestly will probably go with Bradley, no doubt. But the reason why I'm kind of choosing Cole here is that I think you can get him. He's a guy who's not going to be a free agent until 2024. You could probably sign him relatively inexpensively, and it fits that kind of where the Tigers, his strikeout numbers are not bad either. He had 10.4 strikeouts in relief, and he's a guy that fits that kind of swingman. Maybe you could go home, like maybe give him 20 to 30 innings and be like a middle relief arm if the Tigers could just build this, like do the opening starter thing. So if they decide to do something like that, I don't know. Cole's numbers are interesting, but I mean, more than likely, I would, and Matt brings up a good point here that I'm going to show up here. And that, you're absolutely right. That's what I thought. That's why I thought Trevor Williams was going to be the easy go-to. I mean, that's what they always do. They love the Pirates because they do. It's just a thing. And it's
well, who did the Pirates cast off? I mean, that was Tropiano was the one guy I mentioned, but he actually got picked up by the Mets, I think. And then that was another thing that kind of intrigued me by him, as I felt like he almost slipped through the cracks. Like the Mets saw something they liked and picked him up, and then everybody got blown out. They're like, he's from the old guys, get rid of him. But I mean, who else did the Pirates get rid of? I don't know.
The Trivoli.
I mean, we could look at Chris Archer's out there. Maybe they'll sign him.
Yeah, I mean, there's not been really anything reported about him at all. It's been, like I said, there's certain players that have been really quiet about And Archer is coming off of the third. I can never say the name of the surgery properly.
Thoracic outlet surgery.
Yeah, the outlet surgery, and that's brutal. And I know Tiger fans like him possibly as a closer and what have you, and even the idea of putting Michael Fulmer as a closer too. That was something that was brought up. I saw on Twitter a couple days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you know what? I will give credit to Kean. Kean's been on that train for a long time, same with Harris as well. So if you're checking us out on Twitter, check us out on YouTube, although I don't think we have too many views on YouTube, which is fine. We don't really, it's the Tiger Minor League Report channel we should promote more often. But anyway, let's move. Yeah, we haven't done anything. We haven't done anything since Carfax, and it's been a while now. So let's move on to the 1991 Tigers. And this, it's a very painful surgery. Yeah, I don't want to imagine. It's just sound.
Well, it generally happens when it's like a repetitive stress injury, where your nerves, your hands get all cold, or I think I don't remember who it was. Was it Shane Green, who was like half his hand was warm and half his hand was cold, before having to have surgery? Like, yeah, it's not a great thing to have happen. And I don't know about the track record of guys coming back really well from it. I'm sure there are a couple have, but it seems like everyone I can remember hasn't done great after that.
No, and look at the track record, Chris. When I did that article on Archer, it's kind of really hit and miss. It's not like Tommy John where you see some velocity come back on the fastball, what have you. It's really hit and miss, and it hasn't been. There's not as many success stories as there've been per se than Tommy John surgery. So it's been a mixed bag. So let's move into the 1991 Detroit Tigers conversation. And a lot of people on Twitter were pretty excited about this. We'll get the questions afterwards. And this off-season mode, we tend to go around about different subjects. We could talk about Thanksgiving last week, Matt Patricia firing, what have you. But we started a team series last year. So we started looking at World Series teams that won, like the 86 Mets we did. We also did the 98 Padres, which lost to the Yankees behind the Kevin Brown's monster season, 1998, which is phenomenal. But we're going to focus more on the Tigers because obviously we're a Tigers podcast and the 1991 Tigers. And for me, Chris, this is a team, before we'll get to hitting all that, this is a team that this is when I started really, not that I didn't pay attention to the 87 Tigers. I was obviously 6 years old.
Yeah.
6 or 7 years old. And the 91 Tigers were a team that it's my third year Little League. And I started paying attention to stats. I read the Detroit News every day. And I started like clipping out box scores. And I started paying attention and watching this team. It was a fun team to watch because they had so much power. And this is an era where the home runs were starting to creep up around, I think, 1986, where you saw that whole parameter of the
87 was the so-called rabbit ball year.
That's right. And that's when the Tigers, I believe, led the league in home runs or something. I think they're top three in home runs in 1987 behind Darrell Evans. They had Alan Trammell, a monster year as well. And this is the first, this 1991 team, Chris, this is a team in transition. And it really is in a sense because this is the first year without Jack Morris. So you settle with the poor man's Jack Morris. And poor man's in quotations, and Bill Gullickson, who they signed from the Astros. And he's a National League guy. And you're going to be covering the hitting. I'm going to cover the pitching. But just a little more about this 1991 squad. It's weird to think that now you look at the farm. I always like looking at their top prospects farm system. I'm fascinated at looking at a snapshot of the Tigers' history at this point. And your affiliates at this time with Mud Hens, which is, that's cool, normal. It's still what it is now. But your AA affiliate is the London Tigers, and that's the London, Ontario Tigers. And that's just couple hours way up on the 401k and right up here in Ontario, which is pretty cool. So I've been trying to find a London Tigers hat for the longest period of time. No luck. So anybody out there who's watching or listening,
London Tigers.
The Gene Roof, by the way, who managed that team, who just retired by the Tigers, was manager of that team. The Lakeland Tigers, of course, the Fayette Generals, which made an appearance in Bull Durham. So if you're paying attention, when Rusty LaRue is pitching to a team, he's pitching to a Tigers affiliate. So pay attention to that. The Niagara Falls Rapids, which would be the equivalency of West Michigan at that point, and the New York Penn League, which is going away, or it's changing. They're the Wooden Bat League now, right?
5 of the teams from the New York Penn League have splintered off into a kind of MLB draft league. Wood Bat league for guys to increase their draft stock or whatever.
Okay. And then the rookie league team is the Bristol Tigers, which was in the Appalachian League, which is I think going away or also changing.
Same sort of thing as the New York Penn. They're sort of the college short season summer leagues or whatever.
Yeah, and that was for the Pirates rookie team for a long time. The only reason why I know that's because, like I said, I've been writing up Pirate reports the last couple weeks. So, but in terms of the top prospect for the Tigers at the time, Rico Brogna. So if you're familiar with Rico Brogna, Tony Clark was in his way, Chris.
Yeah.
Here's the question. Was 1991 during the Love Fest era, or was that in the 80s? That's definitely in the 80s. At that point, yeah, that was 80. I want to say 86. That sounds about right. 86, 87. Yeah, he was, I think 86, 87, but that was a Sparky Anderson famous comment, him and another player.
That's right. I consider 91 almost sort of like the dead cat bounce year for the Bless You Boys era Tigers. I mean, most of them were gone, but you still had Tram, you still had Lou, you still had Dave Bergman, and Dan Petrie and Walt Terrell had come back. It was kind of like, but this was really the core of this team was new guys that had come in. And they were the first, like, the Tigers had that nice run in 87, and then 89 it was a disaster, and 90 was the Cecil Fielder year, but 91 they were actually competitive again. It was nice to see, and like you said, it was a super fun team to watch.
Yeah, and here's the thing here, it's management too. This is not Bill. It has the fingerprints of Bill LaJoy all over it. But Joe McDonald,
Noakes was already gone, I think.
Yeah, Noakes was gone at this point, but one of the last
87 guy.
Yeah, it was 87 guy. One of the things he orchestrated was the trade for Mickey Telton, and then Joe McDonald, who was in the front office for the Cardinals in 82, and I believe he was part of the Mets front office as well. He takes over, and there was an article. I felt bad for his. I'll show you what he said. Felt bad for his. I think it's
for Matt Noakes or who? Yeah. I don't remember.
Yeah, Matt Noakes had some gnarly.
It's funny, I don't think I don't know if I knew what acne was at that point.
And this is a team who, we'll start with hitting here. This is a team that traditionally I don't know about you, but I remember the Tigers throughout my youth into my teenage years always started slow. And they were a team that just could not get going in April and May and June. But let's talk about the offense first, Chris. And I sent you a link too about what happened on May 1st, 1991.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, the Nolan Ryan thing.
Oh, that was the Nolan Ryan thing. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So 91 was it against the A's or the Blue Jays? I don't remember. 91 was like the year of the no hitter too. There were like 7 no hitters that year. I was deep into collecting baseball cards that year. That's all I remember. But yeah, like it's funny. The 91 Tigers team was either, depending on like your perspective, they were either like a classic Earl Weaver team or a Moneyball team that showed up too early. They led the majors in home runs by like 32. They had 207 home runs or something like that. Nobody was even close. They also led the majors in walk rate and strikeout rate. It was 3-2 outcomes team, but you'd think with a team like that it'd be a bunch of mashers, and they kind of were. They were like, my memories of them are kind of as like a softball team, but they also played pretty good defense, and they had some speed. They were middle of the pack in speed. So it was honestly one of the best Detroit Tigers offenses of all time. They had, 3 dudes who had at least 5 WAR, the Baseball Reference, 4 who had 4 WAR, and 7 who had 3 WAR that year. And you want to guess who the last Tiger who put up 3 WAR according to Baseball Reference? Last Tiger hitter?
In terms of Tiger hitters, 3 WAR?
Yeah.
Tony Phillips?
No, the last one.
Recently. Yeah. I want to say Polanco?
Justin Upton, 2017.
Oh, okay.
So they haven't had, and to get 7 guys with 3 WAR, you have to go back to 2015, basically, if you count all of them. So this one team had 7 guys. Their entire lineup was basically 3 WAR. And in the past, they kind of did it by how the team was built, like beginning at first. But this time, I just decided to pick the guys who had the highest WAR, the best players. And number 1 was Sweet Lou Whitaker, which is kind of apropos because he was also the first one. He came in 1975 and the fifth round of that draft, one round after Jason Thompson, I believe. And we should mention that there was a Dylan Stojanovic. He asked if it was possible for us to. He's a younger fan, which is nice. I didn't know we had young people watching us or listening to us. Said he's been a fan since 2012. If we could put some modern day comparisons to these guys, and that was actually like a fun thing for me. So I appreciate Dylan for asking that. But yeah, with Whitaker, I mean, he was 34 years old in 1991, and it was his best year ever by WAR, which is just kind of crazy. He hit 279 with 23 homers, 90 walks, and 45 strikeouts. That's insane. While playing above average defense at second base. So like the best comparison I could come up with was like Joey Votto, but a good defensive second baseman. Like Lou Whitaker, I don't think we really realized how good he was at the time. Everybody loved him. I mean, he hit a home run or did anything, people screamed Lou when he came to the plate. But yeah, he was a monster that year and deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. But the number 2 player was new to the Tigers that year. Number 2 in WAR was Mickey Tettleton, who 5.6 WAR that year. It was his first year with the Tigers. He came from the Orioles, right? That they traded him for Jeff Robinson.
Yeah, that was the last trade that Bill LaJoy did before he left. Yeah. So,
and it was interesting because Tettleton wasn't like drafted by the A's, and he kind of just split time there for the first 4 or 5 seasons of his career. Didn't do a whole lot, and then I believe he was let go by the A's and he signed with the Orioles, and he had a couple pretty good years, including I think he was an All-Star in '87. But then he gets traded to the Tigers and he just explodes. And what did he hit in 263 with 31 homers, 101 walks, and 131 strikeouts while playing solid defense as a catcher, as a switch hitting catcher. The best modern comparison I could come up with is probably Yasmani Grandal. As Grandal did that once. Tettleton did it like 4 times. But Tettleton was way cooler. And it's sort of, I don't know how to describe it, just like a country way, just always had the massive chaw in his cheek. I can't even do it. It was like he had like an everlasting gobstopper in his mouth or something like that. And he had the super iconic batting stance that was, every kid who watched him play back then can emulate it. He was like this very, yeah. But he was an awesome player. Like he would get MVP votes if he were a modern player. He was really good. And then the third best player on the team was Tony Phillips, another former Oakland A, and another guy who I think this was his second year with the Tigers, right? 91. I think he came in 90. He was a former first rounder out of the New Mexico Military Institute. I don't know if that still exists. But yeah, he was drafted by the Expos and then traded to the Padres, then traded to the A's. And he was just kind of a do-everything guy. He played all over the infield mostly for the A's, including it started out at shortstop, but then mostly second base and third base. And he had a couple good years, but really never stood out. And then he came to the Tigers and he sort of transformed himself. And he became this guy who just walked a ton. And it was just a perfect leadoff hitter and was incredibly versatile. So when he came to the Tigers in 90, he mostly played third base, and he with 99 walks and 85 strikeouts. And then in 91, he hit 284 with what was then a career high 17 homers, 10 steals, and 79 walks. He was just, like I said, a do-everything guy. And he played every position basically, but first baseman and catcher. Yeah. He had 9 games at 6 different positions. And he was another guy with a fun stance because he would just crouch way down. He was also a switch hitter, wasn't he?
Yeah, he switched. He kind of did that hunch because my brother, his first number was number 4 because of Tony Phillips, and so he kind of did a bat wiggle too, and so.
Yeah, and as a kid, they call him Tony the Tiger, and it was like, well, this is fantastic. So I like Frosted Flakes, and I go to Kellogg's and all that good stuff. So yeah, I mean, you got a super utility guy, you got a catcher, you got a second baseman, and then the number 4 player in WAR, which was kind of surprising to me, was Milt Kyler. Who, what's interesting is I remember really liking Milt Kyler because he was super fast. He came up a little bit in 1990, but 91 was basically he was the starting center fielder, and he hit like 260 with a fair amount of walks, but he stole 40 something bases, and he played plus defense in center field. And it's kind of hard to find a comparison like that to a player like that in modern baseball, a guy who just gets all his value from defense and speed. I thought maybe like a Rajay Davis, although Rajay was never that great of a defender. That's funny. No, Kyler. I mean, yeah, and but what's funny is he never played another 100-game season after that. I mean, he was a 4-win player that year, and then just never played much again. So it was just kind of this weird anomaly that year. But I remember liking him a lot because he was so fast. And I guess I didn't compare Tony Phillips to anybody, did I?
I would compare Tony Phillips to, I mean, in terms of versatility to the modern game right now, in terms of, I'm trying to think of like a player that would be like a utility, like a jackknife of trading. I couldn't think of any off the top of my head.
He was a little bit like Ben Zobrist, I guess. Ben Zobrist was like a lot taller and probably hit for a little bit more power.
That's a good comparison.
But like they were basically second baseman by trade, but could play everywhere and did everything. And he walked a ton. He hit for average, hit for some power, stole bases. So, I mean, I don't even know if Ben Zobrist might have been past his peak by 2012, but it's tough to find perfect one-to-one comparisons. So after those guys, you got up the middle. It's second base, catcher, center field. The one after that, Big Cecil Fielder, 3.8 WAR.
There he is.
It's really hard to kind of capture how huge Cecil Fielder was, how big that was especially in Detroit, but really in baseball. You could make the obvious comp to his son Prince, but Cecil Fielder was like 4 inches taller than Prince Fielder. He was just, Big Daddy. He was massive. He had just the biggest thighs and ass you've ever seen in your life. Like literally, he's like his base. He looked like a sumo wrestler. It was like a Volkswagen, and he just crushed the ball. Like when he hit home runs, there was just never any doubt. He'd put him on the roof consistently. The closest comps I could come up with today were maybe like rookie Aaron Judge when he was hitting 52 home runs or whatever, combined with JD Martinez because he came from nowhere. Fielder was a high draft pick. I didn't hear that. What was that?
Oh, that's one of the best wins of all time. Here it is.
What, like the back of a Volkswagen?
No. Mallrats. Yeah.
But yeah, so like this dude showed up from out of nowhere and hit 51 home runs in 1990. And that's another thing that's hard to explain to people how rare that was. That was, I think, the 17th time in baseball history that someone had hit 50 home runs. And it was the first time since George Foster did it in 77 or 78. He was the first AL player to hit 50 home runs since Roger Maris in 1961. I mean, it's been done like 30 times since then, but that was huge. But this was the year after that, obviously. Fielder had been I don't know if he was a first rounder or second rounder, but he never really got full playing time with the Blue Jays. He went off to Japan for a year and hit 300 with 38 home runs, and they called him the Wild Bear or something like that. And he came back, and led the league in home runs and RBIs and finished second in the MVP vote. And then he did the same thing in 1991. 44 home runs, 133 RBIs, 132 RBIs, I think. 33, 78 walks for a good measure. And once again, he finished second in the MVP voting. But I don't know who he lost to in 91. Who would that have been? Ricky Henderson? Was that Ricky?
Yeah, Ricky Henderson.
I think that was the Ricky Henderson year.
And third through Steele.
Yeah. So, I mean, we got a lot of home runs already, and we're only through 5 players. Then their sixth best player, sixth 3-win player, was Alan Trammell, Hall of Famer, who obviously another Tiger lifer. This was kind of his last. He had one other solid year, but he was really breaking down by this point. And of course, he was taken in the second round of that legendary '76 Tigers draft, which may eventually be rivaled by the Dodgers 2016 draft. But I think it stands up pretty well on its own right now. But yeah, in '91 he was 33, only played 100 games, but he hit 250 with 9 homers and 11 steals while playing good defense at shortstop. He's another one who's kind of hard to make a comp to because he never had. You mentioned that '87 season, which was great, but he never put up huge counting stats. Like he was never big a home run guy or stolen base guy. He just did everything really well. He was a little bit like Francisco Lindor, maybe.
That's
I mean,
good.
maybe not quite as an elite a defender, and never hit 30 home runs like Lindor has. But I think the game has changed. And Trammell would probably hit 30 home runs now. Maybe like a Lindor and Carlos Correa or something like that. Like really good, but not quite MVP level.
By the way, we have a question here. Did anyone hit blast like Tiger saying like the only person I could think of in that period of time, probably from 91 and 96. I watched a lot of baseball. I mean, it was just some Rob Deere when he got a hold of one could really blast one. Rob Deere comes to mind. Yeah, Eric Davis. I mean, Eric Davis had a couple. I don't know if he had a legendary blast, but Eric Davis had some good power too.
Well, from a visitor, I think Mark McGuire hit one onto the roof once. I think, but no, I mean his fielder did that with regularity. He just absolutely crushed the ball. I don't know. He was like a caveman swinging a bat. He was just massive. But yeah, I mean it was just so much fun, man. He was like appointment viewing. You had to catch every Cecil fielder at bat because he might destroy the ball. So. And the final 3-win player for the Tigers was Travis Fryman in his first full season. So he was a rookie in 90. He was their first round pick in 87 out of high school in Florida. And he was kind of, billed as the second coming of Trammell. And he did. He played some shortstop, played mostly third base in 90, 91. And he was a good all-around player. He was really linked in that lineup. He was kind of like a classic doubles hitter, I would say. He didn't walk a ton like the rest of the team. But 260 with 21 home runs and 36 doubles in his first full season. I mean that's a lineup that goes 7 deep with really good players, and that doesn't even bring in the other guys that made them ridiculous. You mentioned Rob Deere. Rob Deere I think that was his first year with the Tigers, and he was kind of a prototype of today's hitter too, in like the 3 true outcome guy. He hit 259 with 21 home runs. Oh, I'm sorry, that was Fryman. He had 25 home runs, 89 walks, but also league-leading 175 strikeouts. We used to make fun of Rob Deere for people who in wiffle ball, if you struck out swinging, we call you Rob Deere.
I think Nathan's right. I remember he hit. There's a week where Telton was on fire, so we'll have to double check that, Nate.
Yeah. So the lefties were able to hit the roof a lot more frequently than righties at Tiger Stadium, as I recall. And the famous Mickey Mantle hit one to the lumberyard or whatever. I don't know why that was. I assume it was just closer, but yeah, I mean that sounds vaguely familiar. There's probably somewhere on YouTube, but I think the righties didn't do it nearly as often. Skeeter
Barnes. I mean, he wasn't much of a WAR player, Chris, but he had a sweet name. But he also represented you look at his numbers now. Mm-hmm. He was a utility player, 289. He had OPS of over 800 and the OPS plus of 121. I take that right now.
No, absolutely. I mean, that was, like I said, this was a deep, good offense. They had Lloyd Mosby. I'd forgotten about that. I think he was a former Blue Jay at that point.
Sparky loved former Blue Jays. Yeah.
And then, I mentioned earlier how they kind of felt a little bit like in retrospect, I felt like a softball team. The guy who made them feel like a softball team was Pete Incaviglia, I think, to me.
Yeah.
He was a -1 WAR player. He was Rob Deere without the walks, basically. One of the most legendary college hitters of all time. I think he get like 450 with like 50 home runs one year or something stupid like that.
He might even stairs.
Yeah, that's a good comp for sure. Because I mean that's kind of what he was built like, and he was just an all or nothing swinger.
That's probably true.
It's big unit. It was. I remember he had the McGuire home run against Randy Johnson too. But yeah, I mean like I mentioned, Dave Bergman was still on that team. They had a deep offense, that walked a ton and hit a ton of home runs, and it was super fun to watch. I can't tell you how many times I remember watching on the game, seeing Tony Phillips and Lou Whitaker lead off the game with walks, and then either Cecil Fielder, Mickey Tettleton, or Rob Deere hitting a 3-run homer. It was like, and they just jump out to these big leads, and then the pitching staff would give it right back.
Yeah, and one thing about the offense too, which was we'll get to the pitching here in a second, and this is it's strange to think now, and this doesn't apply to modern baseball because you don't see it. Sparky carried 3 catchers. That was common in that period of time. They carried 3 catchers. To me, you think about it now, you're like, holy crap, 3 catchers. And at one point it was Mickey Tettleton, who was the starting catcher, And then you platoon him with Andy Ellerson and Mark Salas, who was part of the collusion case in 1986. I mean, it's strange to me that they had to think about this as, well, do we carry another pitcher? No, we got to have 3 catchers. 3 catchers.
I mean, Tettleton was such a good hitter for them, such a good offensive player that they obviously wanted to. But he must have caught like 130 games.
He caught
91.
He caught
125.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you didn't want to take him out of the lineup, but yeah, you wouldn't think you'd need 2 extra catchers to cover those other 40 games. But
yeah, there you go. So in terms of the pitching staff, here's some stats for you for the 1991 Tigers pitching staff, and this is.
I'm going to grab the dog, but you go for it.
So what's interesting is if you look at the Tigers this year, they were near the league bottom in strikeouts, and it was the same case in 1991. So this is strange to think about it now because this doesn't apply to modern baseball whatsoever. It was a 4-man rotation. That's it. 4-man rotation. And that rotation consisted of Bill Gullickson, who I mentioned earlier, who they got from Montreal, Walt Terrell, who came over from the Howard Johnson trade originally in 1984, and he was back there. Frank Tanana, who they signed from free agency, and Scott Eldred, among all these other names that got in there too. Mark Leiter. Al Leiter's
there you go.
Was also made some spot starts too, and his nephew, who's going to be a highly regarded pitching prospect coming out of Vanderbilt for the 2021 draft. And it was the bullpen consisted of Mike Henneman, who went down early in August, and I think that's why the Tigers finished under 500 a little bit in September. They kind of struggled down because Mike Henneman was their best pitcher. 2.88 ERA, he was 10-2. Strange to think that, and he had 21 saves, but he wasn't really. I never considered Mike Henneman. You think of closers, you think of Marvin Vieira, you think of even Trevor Hoffman, for example. Mike Henneman to me was. I mean, he led the team in saves he was considered the closer, but for whatever reason, he was always 2 or 3 innings because Sparky always had to go to him and bail him out all the time. So to me, he always seemed like that, just kind of like a swing man reliever, one of those last ones from that era. Mark Leiter, who I mentioned earlier, was out of the bullpen. Another guy who pitched in 68 games as a lefty was Paul Gibson. And I remember him because he had the glasses, and also remember him going to the Yankees eventually. Another former Blue Jay, rest in peace, John Cerruti, who worked for the Blue Jays broadcasting team, and Jerry Don Gleaton, that 3-name. You and I always talk about the 3 names, and so Jerry Don Gleaton. And then Dan Petrie, who came back, wasn't the same guy, and the rest of the bullpen was kind of like a mixed bunch of let's see what they could do, or pitchers that kind of made appearances. Tigers were really high on Steve Searcy, who they drafted out of Tennessee. There's an award, by the way, named after him at the University of Tennessee, the Steve Searcy Award. So that's an indication of how good he was in college. Kevin Ritz, who ended up being part of the Rockies expansion draft. That was a guy who the Tigers were among Tiger prospects, heads, if you guys remember that. And then Rusty Meacham, he did better elsewhere. He was better in the Royals bullpen a little later in his career. But the name, it was just this bullpen was bad. The staff was bad. So I mentioned it. They finished 24th in ERA overall at 4.91. And yes, Joe, you're absolutely right. I think he is second or third. Mike Henneman is, but I was meant that he wasn't. I guess he wasn't like that big lights out closer everybody thinks of. Like when Valverde ran off that save streak, for example, that was 1 inning. Maybe he never went 1 or more 2 innings tops. I don't believe so. Anyway, so the bullpen was spotting a 4.6 ERA. They're dead last in strikeouts at 739. And a team there, this was 24 teams at the time. The next closest was 135 more than they did. So that's how bad in terms of striking out pitchers they were, or hitters. The starters had 436, while the bullpen 303. And maybe that's where I think of, because Mike Henneman wasn't a big K guy. He could pitch to contact. And of course, this is a different era. You pitch to contact then. There's no, you mentioned earlier all the mashing, Chris. The average fastball was 88, 89 miles an hour at this time. So if you comparison now, to answer the listener's question, fastballs were not what they are now. You don't see that kind of movement. You don't see the sharpness. You don't see the kind of breakage you saw then that you do now. So
it's a completely different game. And yes, he was right. Henneman is second all time in saves for Tigers pitchers with 154, behind Todd Jones at 235.
Thank you, Joe. That's a good cover.
3 other guys have 100.
Todd Jones and John Hiller. Right?
Oh.
John Hiller, right?
Hiller, Willie Hernandez, and Valverde all had 100.
Perfect. Awesome. So, by the way, if you guys have a trivia question, because I'm not looking at anything, you can look at my screen right here. I am not. I'm just looking at notes right here. Oh, my monitor went crap. I'll crap one out. Damn it. Now
That's the oldest trick in the book.
Damn it, my monitor went out.
Live streaming, look at my monitor, and then
I have it crapped out. Oh boy. Well, that'll be fine. Oh, there it goes. It fixed. So anyway, so yeah, the bullpen in there in terms of what they were doing, but the pitching staff was led by Bill Gullickson, who won 20 games, who was the last 20-game winner until Verlander in 06? No,
2011.
2011. Yeah, he was next. Yeah, well, I was thinking, I don't know why I thought 06, but Gullickson won 20 games on the strength of 226 innings and 91 strikeouts. Another example of pitching to contact. This is a different era. He allowed 256 hits. So imagine that. Imagine that pulling that crap down. You can't.
Yeah, I know, but remember, I mean, they did have a pretty good defense, but it was just a different era, man. You didn't. That's what made people laugh about, say, like Rob Deere striking out 175 times when you got other people. Lou Whitaker struck out 45 times.
I mean, you look at K numbers, K per 9 for Bill Gullickson, 3.6.
Yeah.
Walt Terrell, 3.3. Frank Tanana was this is Frank Tanana, vintage Frank Tanana. That opening day, 1991. I remember this game because it was one of the first times I watched a thorough ass kicking. And this is the opening. Let's see here. Yep, this is the opening at Comiskey Park, Thursday, April 18th. But I remember watching this game on TV. They won 16-0. And I remember Frank Tanana throwing in that game. He threw a complete game, 7 hits, 3 strikeouts. And I remember it was Jack McDowell. And I'm like, oh, this guy's gonna suck. Little that I know. But yeah.
Did he win the Cy Young that year?
You know what? I don't know. Let me see if he did or not. I think that was the year Scott Erickson won, I believe. Remember? Yeah.
Young
remember when the wins used to matter? Scott Erickson.
That's all that mattered when I was, and not just wins, win percentage.
Ooh.
If you had 20 wins but 10 losses, you weren't getting the Cy Young.
And the reason why I remember that game too is that I think that was the year the White Sox debuted the black and white uniforms, which were the best. I mean, they have some of the best uniforms. And so
McDowell was Cy Young in '93. Sorry.
Okay. The Tigers scored 16 runs on 19 hits against them. And I remember Tony Phillips having a huge day. But the reason why I remember that game is because I remember it was one of the, it was Frank Tanana just tossing it up there, and the White Sox just looked off. And this is opening day in their new stadium. We're moving away from the old Comiskey, and they got their asses kicked. So, but that was in terms of that's what the example of the offense, Chris, doing its thing. But it was the pitching where the pitching was just, they allowed 794 runs. So they scored 817. They almost allowed almost 800 runs. And this is a team that it was a theme of the Tigers throughout the next couple of years here. We'll get to, because the 94-93 teams are intriguing to me because this is the last gasp for Sparky Anderson and in terms of getting a winner, and the 94 strike happened. But here's how bad the staff was. I mean, here you are they were kind of handcuffed with free agency. And I remember writing an article about what Joe McDonald, they couldn't spend any money. At this point, Tom Anahan, the team's former owner, wasn't spending any money. And he was trying to save as much as they can. And they're trying to get bargain bins. And they didn't really make any moves to get themselves better. And here's an indication of how the schedule was in 1991. The Tigers, how good they were. They were in the neighborhood, even when they were struggling under 500 in June. They started heating up a little bit. They were as close as 2 back as of August 5th.
They were tied for first in late August, I thought.
Yeah, they ended up being tied for first on Saturday, August 24th. And they went in. Yeah, and they swept. They had a 3-game sweep of Seattle. And here's the thing. But here's where the Tigers always shot themselves in the foot when they went out to the West Coast.
It still goes on.
Yeah, you know what, Chris, where's the place the Tigers always stink it up?
And the Angels, it seems like to me, but also the Mariners. But yeah,
it's the Angels. I looked it up when we were doing a show last year. There was one point where the Tigers were like 2-21 or some ridiculous amount of stretch against in LA against California. They won the first game 5-1, and they would end up losing the next 4. They lost 2 to California. It was Chuck Finley and Jim Abbott just outdueling Rudy and Gullickson, and then they got swept, or they lost 2 out of 3 to Oakland, and that's where it kind of went tail from there, and then they just never recovered from there. But if you imagine if they would have taken at least 1 or 2 more in that every time they go to Anaheim, they always struggle. It's so weird. But that's where the pitching, you could think maybe a fresh arm would have helped them, but they weren't getting any help. They didn't make any trades. They was, in terms of even just what they were able to get, and they get no help in minor leagues. No, Kevin Ritz wasn't helping them. Steve Cersei wasn't helping them. So every pitcher they brought up wasn't able to do anything. And they traded Jeff Robinson, who was a decent start, but to get the production they got out of Mickey Telton. Also, by the way, you know what? To answer Matt's question, Torey Louisville was traded in March 19th of that season. So,
the Love Fest officially ended in 1991.
There you go. Exactly. And Steve Cersei was so bad. I mean, they were sick of him not doing anything drafted. They dropped him in July. And this is the draft, too, by the way. If you're talking about for draft heads out there, this was the 1991 draft produced Justin Thompson, who we all know that would become synonymous among the Tigers trade later on for the Rangers. He also had Sean Bergman. Say what you will about that. And yeah, they just didn't. They were so close, Chris, but it was just pitching. And it was a common theme, and I don't know. That was the part that was maddening to me, Chris. It's just going out there and then coughing up the runs, like you were saying.
Yeah, I was looking at so they kind of fell apart down in September, like you mentioned, and losing Henneman seemed to be a big deal because they were only outscored by 1 run in September, but they went 14-18. So just like they must have lost a bunch of close games, and yeah, that's a bummer. I mean, it was an older team at that time, and I think I don't remember the 91 Blue Jays all that well. The Blue Jays were really big rivals with the Tigers for 4 or 5 years there, and but you have to assume that was part of the up and coming Blue Jays team that ended up winning 2 straight World Series. So they were on their way up, and the Tigers were kind of having that last gasp, even though they had some interesting new players. They were all like in their early 30s.
And I'm glad you bring up the Jays because I wanted to demonstrate the old versus new. And the Blue Jays, in terms of how they're building their squad, they were, as an expansion team, under Pat Gillick, they were always built through the farm. They did a really good job of getting players and identifying talent. And this is the Cedal Gas. They ended up winning the East that year, but they would lose the Twins in the LCS. But talk about the staff right here. This is the difference between them and the Tigers. Todd Stottlemyre was their ace. Jimmy Key, lefty, who was absolutely monstrous against the Tigers. David Wells, Juan Guzman coming into his own, and former knuckleballer Tom Cadiotti. Am I saying that right?
Tom Cadiotti, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, Tom Cadiotti. And they had a bullpen. I mean, Tom Henke, Mike Timlin, and Dwayne Ward. What more do you need? That's a pretty badass bullpen and this is a bullpen, Chris. Those 2 arms, by the way, I mentioned Timlin and Ward threw over 100 innings. Can you imagine a bullpen arm with 2 arms? 2 arms with 100 innings?
And then Timlin threw for like another 20 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was that was just a better, more well-rounded team. Their offense wasn't as good as the Tigers by any stretch of the imagination, but they had enough pop with Joe Carter, Kevin White. I always loved him in the field. Devon White, I should say.
Roberto Alomar.
Young Roberto Alomar, young John Olerud.
Yeah.
Was
they had Kelly Gruber. Devon White was part of that squad too. Joe Carter, of course, in right field. Pat Borders. Even guys like at Kenny Monilaro, I remember him, and for whatever reason, I always remember him and Ed Sprague came to me. I don't know why I remember Ed Sprague randomly, but yeah, that was the big difference right there. They got more modern. They had a 5-man rotation. The Tigers were still spinning away at 4, and there was something
I completely forgotten about Juan Guzman.
Yeah, he got a lot of money from the Orioles, and then he was good for a season. So and then he just kind of tailed away. So, but yeah. So question wise, Chris, we had some questions this week. Let's jump into the questions.
Well, yeah, I hope that people, if they remember the Tigers, they enjoy that. If not, it was intriguing to them. But our buddy Zeke Jennings had a couple questions. And this goes back to the one thing where we were talking with Brandon about how much can we possibly expect from their new pitching coach, Chris Fetter? And we kind of hope that he'll fix everybody, but there's only so much you can do. But he said, I'll give you one. In terms of Boyd, Fulmer, and Jimenez, what do you think Fetter brings to the table that might help any or all of the three? In terms of just Boyd and Jimenez, which of the two will benefit the most from his presence? Now, I have some specific thoughts on this that I wrote down, but I don't know if you have anything you want to say off the cuff. Or
Go for it.
So I was listening to, the other night, I listened to a Chris Fetter podcast. He was on the Rapsodo podcast. If you had any doubts that Chris Fetter was a huge pitch design nerd, he's on the Rapsodo podcast. And I also remember reading Cody Stavenhagen wrote a really nice piece about him for The Athletic. And these are both when he was still with Michigan. And it seems like his main strength is just looking at what pitchers throw now and figuring out a way to maximize their potential. Basically saying, this pitch isn't working for you, we can change it or we can move to something else. And so his process is basically he has guys go in and do a couple sessions, get their baseline for what they're throwing, spin rates, the break, all that stuff. And then they look at it and see how they can work on it. And then they, compare it later. It's very much a sort of scientifically based process to being a pitching coach, which is refreshing for me to hear. And it's a whole lot of what that, the MVP Machine book is about actually applying science to baseball things. And by science, you just mean hey, we're measuring this and we're keeping track of how it's getting better or worse, rather than just going hey, give out there and get over the rubber and stay on your front half and all the things that pitching coaches do. And that's not to really dismiss, pitching coaches and scouting and experience, but this is a guy who really digs into the data. Realistically, I don't think he can do a whole lot for Matthew Boyd, because Matthew Boyd is the exact same type of guy. I don't think Fetter's going to show Matthew Boyd anything that he doesn't already know. Matthew Boyd was also on the Rapsodo podcast once. So there are not a ton of pitchers who are more into this stuff than Matthew Boyd. I think, if anything, Fetter might be able to help him get kind of a more consistent release point. I think one of the things that popped up last year people looked at is that Boyd's arm seemed to drop when he was throwing a slider. So maybe they can work on that. Michael Fulmer's issues, and you wrote that story about him, it was just basically related to velocity and command. His velocity was down about 2 miles an hour across the board, and he wasn't putting the pitches where it needed him to be. Some of that is probably just him coming back from Tommy John surgery, and hopefully it'll get a little bit better. He had to alter his mechanics a little bit to put less stress on his knee. I think maybe one way that Fetter could help him is to try to get a little bit more separation in his pitches. And he's basically a fastball or slider pickup guy. He also throws a sinker, but we'll call him the both. But the fastball and the sinker are both 93. The slider was 88, and the changeup's 87. So there's not a whole lot of hard or soft stuff in there, and not a whole lot of difference. He's thrown some curveballs, and we've talked about hey, what if he becomes more of a four-seam curveball guy rather than a sinker slider guy? I mean, that's kind of a completely change in his what he throws. But I could see Fetter getting him to try something like that. I don't expect it, but it's the sort of thing you could see. But I really don't know. I mean, I don't know. Fulmer was good as a sinker slider guy when he was healthy and throwing hard. So he's either going to have to get back to that, or they're going to have to figure out a way to change him. I think the guy with the best chance to improve under Fetter is probably Joe Jimenez, because I think he has the most to work with just from the baseline. Jimenez his fastball has just about everything you want. He's got above average velocity. I mean, it's kind of close to average-ish now. It's 95, but that's average now for relievers. But he's got great extension. So the perceived velocity is better, and he's got really high spin rate. So those are three things that's good to have. That's a good fastball, but it's always getting crushed for some reason. And I don't know if it's because his slider doesn't look like his fastball out of the hand. It's easy to pick him apart. Or if maybe he needs to scrap a slider altogether and maybe try to get – it seems like he needs something that looks more like his fastball for longer to get people off it. So I don't know if it means throwing a slurve, something with a little more hump to it. or maybe just trying to figure out a way to tighten up, make the slider harder. So instead of being like 86, it's more like 88 or 90, something like maybe a little shorter slider with some cut action. I don't know.
More like a 10-4 action then, comparatively speaking.
Well, 10-4, good buddy. Yeah, something like, I mean, his slider is I mean, that would be more like a slurve, I guess. But yeah, something. I just feel like there's something there that they can figure out with him where they can give him a more consistent secondary offering. It might just be sticking with the changeup more. But I feel like with his fastball, he's got that baseline that Federer's looking for, that they can really build off that, and they're going to find something that can tunnel with the fastball, or at least something that plays off of it well to really maximize his arsenal. I don't know. I mean, I'm not super high on Joe Jimenez, but like I said, there's something there to work with. So I think of those three, I think he's the one who's most likely to benefit from Chris Federer.
Yeah, because I mean, I think Jimenez has got that really good extension, Chris, and if they can find a way to, on his release point, maybe it's just changing something on his release point or coming off a certain way, because sometimes it feels like, and looking at now more intelligently, maybe when he's opening up his delivery, when he gets that arm rung, that's even his slider looks completely different than when we saw him in the minor leagues. His slider was darting all over the place when we saw him in West Michigan. And then later, I think we saw him. I thought we saw him somewhere else. But anyway, something perhaps maybe in his release point and they could just figure that out. But in terms of you mentioned in something that you've been, in terms of Federer's work, you've been talking about what he did with Tommy Henry and Jeff Criswell and Carl Kaufman. So he's built out Michigan's base as a result for the pitching. I mean, in terms of like the run they've had in the last, you haven't seen anything like this since the 80s. So. Mm-hmm. To me, whatever he decides to do, I'm sure it'll be fine. And the only thing I can say off the cuff, because your piece on Motor City Bengals was well done, and it explained a lot, and it explained something very complicated. Because I still have a problem with it sometimes, trying to explain something very hard, high level, to just make it kind of more common sense, And you did it pretty well. Where it's like, well, crap, I don't understand what you're saying. I think that. For me, the one thing I want to have fans, he's not going to solve everything. Mm-hmm. But I think, I mean, in terms of what we've seen from Rick Anderson, no knock on Rick Anderson, who's been a pitching coach for a long time, but I mean, he's not going to go out there and go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I just think that Federer, when something goes wrong, Federer will have a better understanding of why than maybe Rick Anderson did, or they'll be able to say, hey, this is what happened in the 5th inning, your arm dropped, and that's something that they probably would notice in film and stuff like that anyway. I mean, there's a reason that so many other teams were after Federer, including like the Yankees and the Diamondbacks. Like he was highly respected in the game, and he's a really good pitching coach, and the Tigers really got a good one. So
yeah.
Yeah, sure. But like you said, there's only so much a pitching coach can do. He's not out there throwing the ball. He's not going to, I think I said in my article, he's not going to turn Fulmer into Roy Halladay. But if you can improve, just say you improve a pitch 5%. I mean, that's a lot. 1%, you could even mean the difference between, sticking in rotation and having to move to the bullpen. So I trust that he's going to work hard, and he's going to do the best he can, and he's got some really interesting pitchers to work with. I'd love to talk to him to see what he's going to do with Spencer Turnbull, because his pitches go all over the place, and I don't know, it'd be fun to work with that. But so is this Mr. Joe Dexter has been following along with us, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And he asked of all the recent non-tendered players, which is the best fit and which is most realistic fit for the Tigers. We kind of touched on that earlier, right? But I don't know if we want to double back to that.
Yeah, go for it.
I had said I think the best fit is David Dahl. I mentioned that earlier. I just think he fits what the Tigers need. He fits, if he works out, that he fits for the next 3 years. But I think he's going to have a lot of options, and he's like an Alabama kid, so it wouldn't shock me if he ends up on the Braves or maybe the Astros or something like that. I think the best fit might be Eddie Rosario for the reasons you said earlier. I mean, he's got a power, and he's that back hitter that the Tigers seem to like. So those are the and I mentioned, Casale earlier too. I think he would be a good fit for the Tigers, but yeah, that's what I have for those.
I have. So I mentioned earlier, I mentioned the AJ Cole mention. I mentioned him. I mentioned also Dahl. I was a big fan of Bradley Rosario. I mean, Rosario still to me is the clubhouse favorite for me. And Kyle Schwarber is good. I know people want Kyle Schwarber, but I doubt. I saw the rumor, but of course the Yankees are always rumored everybody. That's always the Yankees this, Yankees that. So, but I like Schwarber, but I don't know. I'd rather go with Rosario, but continue on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like Schwarber's. He walks and he hits for power, and
Right.
That's nice. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, realistically, any of these guys can fit if they can play Major League Baseball. And then let's see, we had a question from Field Diamond. What are the most likely free agent signings for the Tigers in 2021? That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Much we write about, hey, Colton Wong or George Springer or stuff like that. I don't think we all expect that to happen. We just kind of like, hey, wouldn't it be fun? And this is what it would look like. We touched on, it wouldn't shock me at all if we see like Crone or Scope back, because they still need people at those positions, basically. I think, and you talked earlier, I think they're going to go after a veteran pitcher or two, although I don't think necessarily it's going to be a big name. I think it might be like a reclamation project like Jimmy Nelson or Michael Wacha, or just like a really uninspiring innings eater type. I talked about that earlier. They're going to need somebody 8 innings. So someone like Tommy Malone or Homer Bailey, just somebody they can get for $3 million. I'd love to be more optimistic about it, but I don't know. I feel like they're going to do this 1-year thing for one more year. If that, not go any long-term deals with guys who can be a part of the future.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot he even was even. That's a name we haven't really touched. I mean, I haven't touched.
He barely pitched this year. He was with the Royals in 2019. I don't remember where he was this year. He barely pitched, but he's a guy out there looking like, American Psycho pitching. Got 2 no-hitters.
It's kind of like that face.
Yeah.
In terms of free agent, yeah, there's honestly Field Diamond. I wish I had a better answer than. But I mean, you know what? They were rumored to be involved with Walker.
Yeah, Taiwan Walker.
Yeah, Taiwan Walker,
which would be nice. I would like that.
Oh, I love that a lot. I mean, he'd be perfect. It's a guy who is under 30 years old. You signed him for 2 years, shores up that rotation quite a bit, and his numbers were getting better when he was in Toronto. He was originally signed by Seattle and then got traded to Toronto, or the other way around.
No, he was signed by Seattle, traded to Arizona.
Not this year. Was he traded for
this
Seattle?
year? Oh, yeah. I think he was re-signed in Seattle, and then they traded him to Toronto in the middle of the year.
Yeah, as
Toronto added him and Robbie Ray, and sorry,
that's okay. Walker would be, to me. Walker would be my number 1 choice right now. The fill up the rotation.
Let's see. The one other question we had was regarding the minor leagues. It was from Jay. That I read that West Michigan will be the high A affiliate, assuming Lakeland will be the low A and Toledo will remain triple A. Any word on location of the Tigers double A affiliate? So nothing has been officially announced.
Right.
We're assuming. I mean, it's been heavily hinted that the Midwest League and the is going to flip to high A, and the Florida State League is going to become low A. We assume that's going to happen, but like we said, nothing official. I haven't heard anything about Erie. They did post pictures of their souvenir shop that was recently renovated or whatever, and there are just tons and tons of Tarek Skubal jerseys in there. That might not mean anything. Things can change quickly, but I feel like Erie is going to stick in the organization, the double A. It seems to me that the team that's out of luck is probably Connecticut or Norwich or whatever. I feel like but then, they weren't one of the 5 teams involved in this new Woodbat League, so I don't really know what's going to happen there. But I think Erie's going to stick around for a while. We'll see. We've talked before about how cool it would be for us personally if they move to Lansing or Midland, something like that. Because Lansing would be ideal. It's half an hour from my house, and Jesse Goldberg Strasburg or whatever. He's good people.
He's good people. And that lemonade ball idea they did over summer was fantastic. Yeah. That was really well done. I like seeing those. That yellow ball kind of stands out a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jay. I mean, and Patrick O'Kennedy from Bless You Boys answered the question too. So thanks, Patrick. Patrick's a good dude over at Bless You Boys. And I see Erie lining it up in terms of even. I mean, there's to me. You look at it now with West Michigan being high A. That's just for. Of course, unofficially, of course, that would just benefit everybody who loves minor league baseball. You get to see the Riley Greens of the world. You get to see the higher caliber. And for people who live in Lakeland, I mean, Lakeland, you're going to get the same effect, though. No home runs are going to get hit out either one. I mean, it's not going to change. Is it, Chris?
It will be interesting to see how that, because, yeah, both of them are heavily defensive, like the leagues that favor pitching.
Right.
It'll be interesting. We've talked before a long time about how you can't trust college pitchers in the Midwest League because they, especially on lefties with changeups, because they just go out there and carve people up. It'll be interesting to see what happens. You wouldn't think that the run factors would change that much, but it makes sense because it's the first full season minor league level, and you're going to be right there at the basically Tigers Academy or whatever you want to call it, the headquarters, Joker Marchant. So. And West Michigan Whitecaps fans will get to see if this does come to pass, which we think it is. They'll get to see a bunch of the players they had last year, and like you said, probably including Riley Green. Although who knows, maybe they'll send them right to AA Lansing.
Well, yeah, or it'd be awesome. West Michigan and Lansing right there. Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, but it's to me it is exciting that we can actually probably start talking about it, and hopefully there's an announcement sooner or later, but I guess there's a hang up.
It'll be this. Well, I guess today's Thursday, isn't it? So yeah, maybe this weekend.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I know the Fresno's pissed off right now. Staten Island just is about to sue. So there's some hangups right there. So Fresno, I saw something on Twitter that I got sent, and there's
Fresno, the most populous city in the United States that isn't on a major interstate. Bloop. Yeah.
A fun fact. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Was there any other? Was there? We end the show on that fun fact. Was there any other questions I'm thinking of?
Those are all the ones I saw on Twitter. I apologize if somebody else asked a question and I missed it. I was checking. That was from my retweet. I don't know if anybody asked questions on the original tweet, but I don't know. We're an hour and a half, so
yeah.
Seems like,
yeah, it's definitely
I don't know if anybody's even still with us, but I appreciate anybody coming to watch us and ask us questions. That's fun.
We got about 10. We have 10 people watching us right now. So for the first time,
I feel like we might have 10 people who left it on. They're probably making grilled cheese or watching The Crown or something.
Dude, watch The Crown. Speaking of, The Crown, or if you're watching The Crown, the new season with, look, we talked about this privately, but Gillian Anderson playing Margaret Thatcher still is a mind bleep to me because she's very, very attractive, and she's playing
that's
a woman that's not viewed as in some circles in Britain as just was not well liked. In other words,
well, I mean, some people loved her, some people hate her. Yeah, but no, that's the. I don't know if you've ever seen that Jim Jeffries stand-up special where he's talking about hot privilege.
Yeah.
And about how attractive people they get uglied up for movies, and it's not fair to the ugly people.
And it's definitely the case with Gillian Anderson, who, by the way, it was weird. It was every interview growing up. I'd never seen her do an English accent. I didn't even know she was from England, or I think she's Irish, I believe.
No, I mean, I think she's from Michigan, isn't she?
Yeah, she's an Army brat.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, we
yeah. Thanks, Joe. I love her in, I think I told you, in the show Sex Education, which is one of my favorite Netflix shows. She plays a sex doctor with an awkward teenage son, and it's really funny and good. But
yeah, anyway. I got to check that out. So, all right, thank you so much for listening to our first broadcast. If you liked it, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Follow us on Twitter at Rajcast Baseball, now that I changed the name because I've been doing some different things. Rajcast81, as Dan Hasey said to me, is dead. And then you can follow Chris Brown at Chris Brown 0914. And look for our content too at Motor City Bengals. Check out the latest great article by Chris at motorcitybengals.com about pitch design and how that works and how Chris Vetter is going to make the Tigers better in that regard. If you like the show, if you like the way we do in live feed, we'll do this every Thursday if you like. If we're all camera shy, what have you. And so for that, we'll see you next week. The podcast will be dropping tomorrow. And until then, have a good week, everybody.
Look at that.
Hold on, I'm going to end it.